Lemmy Kilmister, the legendary frontman of Motörhead, was famous for much more than just his powerful voice and wild rock and roll lifestyle. He was known throughout the music world for his complete honesty about everything, especially when it came to other bands. Unlike many musicians who try to stay diplomatic in interviews, Lemmy never held back his real opinions. When he didn't like something, he said so directly and without apology. This brutal honesty made him both respected and sometimes controversial in the rock community. Throughout his long career, Lemmy developed strong feelings about certain bands and musical styles. He had very clear ideas about what rock and roll should be, and he wasn't afraid to criticize bands that he felt didn't live up to those standards. Here are 5 bands that Lemmy particularly disliked, and the reasons behind his strong opinions about them. Motley Crue and the glam metal scene. One of the bands that Lemmy had the strongest opinions about was Motley Crue. This wasn't just about their music, but about everything they represented in the world of rock. Lemmy saw glam metal as everything that was wrong with rock music in the 1980s. To him, it was all about appearance and spectacle, rather than the actual music itself. Motley Crue became famous not just for their songs, but for their wild image. They had big, teased hair, wore heavy makeup, and dressed in leather and lace outfits that looked more like costumes than regular clothes. This whole approach to rock music made Lemmy laugh, but not in a good way. He believed that rock and roll should be about how well you could play your instruments and how powerful your music sounded, not about how dramatic you could look on stage. In many interviews over the years, Lemmy made fun of the entire glam metal movement. He thought bands like Motley Crue were more like actors playing roles than real musicians. He called them posers because he felt they cared more about creating a shocking image than about making genuine rock music. This was completely opposite to everything that Motörhead stood for. While Motley Crue was trying to appeal to as many people as possible with their flashy style and radio-friendly songs, Motörhead stuck to a much rougher, more honest sound. Lemmy's band mixed influences from blues and punk rock to create something that was raw and uncompromising. They never worried about whether their music would be popular on the radio or whether they looked good in music videos. This difference in approach made Lemmy see Motley Crue as everything he was fighting against in rock music. However, Lemmy wasn't completely hostile toward the individual members of Motley Crue as people. He actually got along well with some of them, especially bassist Nikki Sixx. Sixx had always been a fan of Motörhead and respected what Lemmy had accomplished in his career. The two musicians could be friendly when they met, even though Lemmy made it very clear that he didn't like Motley Crue's music or their approach to rock and roll. The difference between the two bands became even more obvious when you looked at their lifestyles. Both Motörhead and Motley Crue were known for partying hard and living wild lives, but they did it in completely different ways. Lemmy's idea of rock and roll excess came from an older tradition of blues and rock music. It was about whiskey, working hard, and never giving up. Motley Crue's version of the rockstar lifestyle was much more about showing off and getting attention. They became famous for their wild parties, expensive habits, and crazy behavior that often made headlines in music magazines. Lemmy also had strong negative feelings about Bon Jovi, though for different reasons than his problems with glam metal or theatrical bands. His issue with Bon Jovi was that they had taken rock music and made it too smooth and safe for mainstream audiences. While Motörhead kept their music fast, aggressive, and rough around the edges, Bon Jovi built their success on catchy songs, sing-along choruses, and a polished sound that was perfect for radio play. This approach to rock music went against everything that Lemmy believed in. He thought that real rock and roll should come from the streets and should have a dangerous, rebellious edge to it. Bon Jovi's music was specifically designed to appeal to as many people as possible, which meant removing the rough, challenging aspects that Lemmy felt were essential to good rock music. Lemmy once said that he could write better songs than Bon Jovi while he was sleeping and without sounding weak. This comment perfectly captured how he felt about their music. He didn't just think their songs were bad, he thought they lacked the power and authenticity that rock music needed to have. For Lemmy, rock wasn't supposed to be about writing perfect love songs or creating music that would make everyone happy. It was supposed to be about rebellion, energy, and having a real attitude. The difference between the two bands became very clear when you looked at their songwriting. Lemmy's lyrics often dealt with themes like excess, war, speed, and the difficult realities of life as a touring musician. Bon Jovi's biggest hits, on the other hand, were about love, hope, and overcoming challenges. Songs like "Livin' on a Prayer" and "You Give Love a Bad Name" became huge anthems that entire generations of fans loved to sing along with. But to Lemmy, these songs were just radio-friendly fluff that was designed to be as inoffensive as possible. He didn't respect a band that, in his opinion, had watered down rock's rebellious spirit just to achieve mainstream success. This wasn't necessarily about the quality of the songwriting itself, but about what the music represented and what it was trying to accomplish. Lemmy also had problems with Bon Jovi's image and visual style. While Motörhead's look was based on a tough, no-nonsense biker aesthetic with leather jackets, denim, and an overall sense of danger, Bon Jovi fully embraced the polished rock star look of the 1980s. They had big hair, tight pants, and glossy music videos that fit perfectly into the commercial rock scene that Lemmy often criticized. Even though Bon Jovi wasn't as extreme as some of the more flamboyant glam metal bands, they still represented the kind of slick, commercialized rock that Lemmy had no respect for. He saw them as being too calculated and too concerned with their image and their commercial success to ever be considered authentic rock and roll. Despite his harsh criticisms, Lemmy never made his disagreements with bands like Bon Jovi personal. He had a way of attacking the music and what it represented without necessarily harboring deep resentment toward the individual musicians themselves. It wasn't about disliking John Bon Jovi as a person. It was about what his band represented in the world of rock music. Metallica and the Evolution Dilemma. Lemmy's relationship with Metallica was much more complicated than his feelings about the other bands on this list. Unlike Motley Crue, Manowar, or Bon Jovi, Metallica was a band that Lemmy actually had a strong influence on and a personal relationship with. Motörhead was one of the key influences on the creation of thrash metal, and the members of Metallica, especially James Hetfield and Lars Ulrich, openly idolized Lemmy throughout their careers. To Lemmy, this kind of behavior seemed childish and pointless. While he certainly wasn't against having a good time, he thought that rock and roll should be about rebellion and authenticity, not just about acting outrageously to get noticed. This fundamental difference in philosophy made it impossible for him to respect what Motley Crue was doing, even though both bands were successful in their own ways. Manowar and theatrical heavy metal. Another band that really annoyed Lemmy was Manowar. This group built their entire career around the idea of being epic heavy metal warriors, complete with swords, leather outfits, and songs about battles and mythology. While many fans loved this theatrical approach to metal music, Lemmy thought it was completely ridiculous. Manowar started in the early 1980s and quickly became known for their over-the-top image. Their songs were filled with stories about warriors, epic battles, and the power of heavy metal music. When they performed live, the band members would dress up like medieval fighters, carry actual swords, and pose like heroes from fantasy movies. They took themselves very seriously and often talked about being the defenders of true heavy metal. This kind of dramatic presentation was exactly what Lemmy couldn't stand about some metal bands. He didn't think that rock music needed to be turned into a theatrical performance with costumes and props. In his opinion, good rock and roll should speak for itself through the power of the music, not through elaborate stage shows and fantasy themes. Lemmy wasn't quiet about his feelings toward Manowar. In interviews, he openly made fun of their warrior image and their serious attitude about being metal heroes. He once called them a joke band, making it very clear that he found their entire approach to music laughable. This wasn't just about the way they looked or acted on stage. He also had problems with their attitude toward other musicians. Manowar often positioned themselves as the guardians of true heavy metal music. They would criticize other bands for not being dedicated enough to the genre or for not being as metal as they were. This kind of behavior really bothered Lemmy, who had spent his entire career proving his authenticity through his music and his commitment to rock and roll, not through bragging or putting down other musicians. One thing that particularly annoyed Lemmy about Manowar was their obsession with being the loudest band in the world. They even got into the Guinness Book of World Records for their extremely loud live performances. While Motörhead was also known for playing very loud music, Lemmy never saw volume as a competition or a way to prove how good they were. For him, playing loud was just a natural part of making powerful rock music. not something to brag about or use as a marketing strategy. At the heart of Lemmy's criticism was his belief that Manowar had created a fake image that was more important to them than their actual music. While he understood that all successful rock bands need to have a strong visual identity, he felt there was a big difference between having a recognizable style and completely making up a larger-than-life character to play on stage. Motörhead had their own distinctive look with their skull mascot and leather clothing, but to Lemmy, this came naturally from who they were as people and musicians, not from trying to create a fantasy persona. Bon Jovi and mainstream rock success. In their early years, Metallica embodied everything that Lemmy valued in heavy music. Their albums like Kill 'Em All, Ride the Lightning, Master of Puppets, and Justice for All were filled with the kind of raw energy and uncompromising attitude that made thrash metal such a powerful force in music. The influence of Motörhead was obvious in Metallica's fast-paced rhythms and their refusal to conform to mainstream trends. Metallica even showed their appreciation for Lemmy directly by covering several Motörhead songs and releasing the Garage Days Revisited EP, which demonstrated their love for the kind of music that Lemmy championed. The relationship between the two bands was built on mutual respect and a shared commitment to powerful, authentic metal music. However, as Metallica's career progressed, their sound began to change in ways that didn't sit well with Lemmy. He was already somewhat concerned when The Black Album was released in 1991, as its slower tempos and more polished production marked a shift toward a more mainstream-friendly sound. But it was the Load, 1996, and Reload, 1997 albums that really disappointed him. With these records, Metallica almost completely abandoned thrash metal in favor of a bluesier, hard rock-oriented sound. They incorporated alternative rock influences and took a much more laid-back approach to songwriting. Many longtime fans were upset by this transformation, and Lemmy was no exception. To Lemmy, Metallica's Load and Reload era felt like a betrayal of their original spirit. He believed they had lost the edge that had made them great, trading their raw intensity for something safer and more commercially accessible. This was particularly frustrating for him because he had always been outspoken about his dislike for bands that softened their sound to appeal to wider audiences, and now he was seeing it peep into a band he had helped influence and that he cared about. While Lemmy never completely disowned Metallica, it was clear that he much preferred their early thrash-driven material over their later experiments with different styles. His disappointment wasn't coming from a place of jealousy or resentment, but from genuine passion for the music and his belief that Metallica was capable of much more than what they were delivering during this period. Despite these criticisms, Lemmy's relationship with Metallica never truly became hostile. Unlike some critics who dismissed the band entirely for their stylistic changes, Lemmy's complaints came from a place of caring about the music and wanting to see Metallica remain as fierce and uncompromising as they had been in their early days. Over time, Lemmy reconciled with the band and continued to support them as friends and fellow musicians. Metallica, for their part, never stopped respecting and admiring Lemmy. They often referred to him as a mentor and a legend, and they made sure to honor his contributions to their music at every opportunity. The Eagles and soft rock. Perhaps no band represented everything that Lemmy hated about popular music more than the Eagles. This highly successful group from the 1970s was known for their carefully crafted songs, slick production, and a sound that blended rock, country, and folk elements into radio-friendly hits. Songs like Hotel California, Take It Easy, and Desperado became defining anthems of their era and were beloved by millions of fans around the world. But to Lemmy, this wasn't rock and roll at all. He saw the Eagles as soft, uninspired, and completely lacking in the rebellious spirit that he believed defined real rock music. In his mind, the Eagles weren't much different from easy-listening pop music. They were catering to mainstream audiences with soothing melodies and a clean-cut image rather than delivering anything truly dangerous or exciting. Lemmy's hatred for the Eagles went far beyond just their sound. It was also about what they represented in the music industry. The band was deeply associated with the laid-back, sun-soaked California rock scene of the 1970s. a culture that was completely opposite to the gritty, working-class roots of Motörhead. While Lemmy and his bandmates lived the hard, fast life of constant touring, playing in small clubs, and embracing all the rough edges of rock and roll, the Eagles were at the center of the polished, high-budget Los Angeles music industry. They were the poster boys for a generation of rock stars who lived comfortable, luxurious lifestyles, rather than the tough, demanding life that Lemmy associated with authentic rock music. One of Lemmy's biggest problems with the Eagles and soft rock in general was that it stripped away all the energy and danger from rock music. To him, rock and roll was supposed to be unpredictable, rough, and full of raw power. The Eagles, on the other hand, built their success on smooth vocal harmonies, gentle acoustic guitar playing, and radio-friendly songwriting that lacked any of the rough edges that he valued. Their music was designed to be pleasant and accessible, the kind of thing that could play in the background without disturbing anyone or challenging listeners in any way. For Lemmy, this was the complete opposite of what rock should be. He believed rock music should grab people's attention, make them feel something powerful, and maybe even make them a little uncomfortable. Lemmy's dislike for the Eagles also came from his lifelong rejection of anything that felt overly commercialized. While Motörhead never compromised their sound for radio play or mainstream appeal, the Eagles thrived in the corporate rock system, selling millions of albums and dominating the airwaves throughout the 1970s. They represented a version of rock that was specifically tailored for mass consumption rather than one that stayed true to its rebellious roots. Lemmy had no problem with bands being successful. After all, he wanted Motörhead to be as big as possible. But he despised the idea of compromising musical integrity to achieve that success. And in his view, the Eagles had done exactly that. The Eagles' massive popularity made their music nearly impossible to escape. Whether it was playing in bars, on the radio, or in the background of movies and television shows, their smooth sound was everywhere. For Lemmy, this probably made them even more unbearable. His hatred for the band wasn't just a casual opinion. It was a deeply ingrained rejection of a musical style that had become a huge part of mainstream culture. Conclusion. Despite his strong opinions and harsh criticisms of these bands, Lemmy never let his dislike for certain types of music get in the way of his own mission as a musician. He didn't spend his time trying to tear down bands like the Eagles or Bon Jovi. Instead, he simply made it clear that their style wasn't for him, and he focused his energy on making the kind of music he believed in. If anything, his disdain for soft rock and overly commercial music only strengthened his commitment to keeping Motörhead as loud, fast, and uncompromising as possible throughout their entire career. His criticisms of other bands came from his deep passion for authentic rock and roll and his unwavering belief that music should be powerful, honest, and true to its rebellious spirit. Lemmy's brutal honesty about other musicians might have been controversial, but it was also refreshing in an industry where many artists try to avoid saying anything that might offend anyone. His willingness to speak his mind, even when it might make enemies, was just another part of what made him such a respected and influential figure in Rose, Sikh music. Whether people agreed with his opinions or not, they always knew that Lemmy was telling them exactly what he really thought,